If somebody is listening today and they've never practiced sales before, they've never done role play before, you mentioned, get with somebody in the car. What if they're by themselves? How can they practice by themselves?
I think when you're by yourself, it's obviously not easy to role play with yourself. You will
Right.
typically be successful when you do that. But here's my thought on getting some practice with yourself. Think about the toughest questions that a customer might ask you. Write them down. The very hardest questions. Why is your product 20% more than everybody else's? Why should I trust you when you're a small company when there are other much larger companies that I could potentially work with? Why should I shift from the existing company that I work with? There's a story I tell about a gentleman by the name of Ben Duffy who won a big piece of business because he did just that. Ben Duffy was working with a major American company. His call was on the president of the company. He sat in his hotel and wrote down the toughest questions he thought that person might ask him, brought those questions to the call the next day, and was therefore prepared for those tough questions. He didn't have a chance to role play with anybody. He just wrote them down the night before. And by the way, when you start imagining the very toughest questions, likely not all of them will come up, but you are at least prepared by imagining the hardest, most horrific, the toughest question that someone might ask you. And by imagining the toughest one, you're prepared for things that might even be not quite as tough. As Mark Twain once said, my life has been filled with many tragedies, most of which never happened. So imagine the toughest thing that could come up in that meeting, and you will indeed be prepared.